In John Keels' Strange Creatures from Time and Space, he finally revealed a theory that he'd been working on, and that was the idea of window areas. It's literally giving us monsters, it's giving us flying saucers, and it's giving us these strange men in black.
I can still see it. I don't have to close my eyes. I can see it.
And I'm sitting there looking at them and I'm going, what? And they said, yeah, it followed us, but when we got right about C.C. Lewis's farm, it disappeared.
That was the beginning of about 1.5 to 2 years later to become known as the Mothman sightings.
It was about 8 feet tall, black. That thing picked me up and it put its wings back and whoosh, it was gone.
Some of the more recent events have left us a little stumped.
There is nothing logical about flashing a laser at a hillside.
Yeah, right.
That should make a frequency appear.
Sufficiently strange. There's a ball of light up in the trees.
Since our recent investigations were leaving us with more questions rather than answers, it was time to turn back to some of our best resources to try to understand the data we collected so far and to see where it might be leading us. Once again, we sat down with author and 14 researcher Tony Breeden for his take on what we had experienced and to look a little deeper into the works of John Keel, particularly his window area theory.
In 1952, one of the more famous things that happened is that we had the 1952 Washington merry-go-round. Right? Washington, D.C. has 2 weekends in July where flying saucers are seen by civilians, by military personnel, by airport personnel, and also show up on radar. Now they're explained later as temperature inversions. It's kind of the swamp gas of its age. After the first weekend in West Virginia, in Huntington again, we have all sorts of lights being seen all over the sky, just like 3 days after that. The second weekend of the Washington, D.C. merry-go-round happens, and then we see it again. Another place in West Virginia experiences a flying saucer. And then, of course, what happens September 12th of 1952? Flatwoods, which is possibly our most famous, was that an alien? Was it our close encounter of the third kind, the first official one on American soil? I'd like to think so. I don't think it was an owl. Despite some people deciding the owl is the universal cryptid solvent. I really don't think it applies here. But lots of people across several states saw the meteor or fireball or whatever that was go across the sky, and then it eventually landed on a hilltop in Flatwoods, where, next thing you know, we have stories from around the world about a 9-foot tall creature that's worse than Frankenstein.
My name's Andrew Smith. I am the Executive Director of the Braxton County Convention and Visitors Bureau, as well as the curator of the Flatwoods Monster Museum. It's located in downtown Sutton in central West Virginia. The Flatwoods Monster Museum is a project of the Braxton County Convention and Visitors Bureau, and it came about because the Convention and Visitors Bureau office needed to move in 2018. And in that process, we were looking at, good locations to have an office, to have a visitor center, and that sort of thing. And this location, 208 Main Street in Sutton, was an option, but it was kind of a lot bigger than we needed it to be. And the one thing that I had learned for sure during my previous years with the Convention and Visitors Bureau was that there was a ton of interest in the Flatwoods Monster, and up to that point, there really wasn't a whole lot you could do that had to do with the monster in the area. So I convinced my board of directors that if we're going to buy this big building as our office and visitor center, that it kind of needed to double as a Flatwoods Monster Museum. So that's kind of where it came out of. But you know, truth be told, 97% of all traffic that ever comes through here is as a result of the Flatwoods Monster. I'm always really shocked when someone comes in and they're just like, yeah, I need a West Virginia road map, and then they get it and leave. That almost never happens. So the Flatwoods Monster was seen in the town of Flatwoods on September 12th, 1952. It was seen by a group of witnesses, 7 as a matter of fact, whose ages range from 9 years old to the youngest to 32 to the oldest. And the oldest being Kathleen May, who was the primary witness that was most commonly interviewed at the time. What happened was all these kids were playing around the Flatwoods Elementary School, and they see an object fly through the sky and appear to land on a nearby hilltop. So they all decide, let's go see what that was. So they run to this hilltop, and just so happened that 2 of the boys were brothers. Their names were Eddie and Fred May. They were in this group, and they were going to be passing their home where their mother and their sister was home, their mother being Kathleen. So they popped in and, you know, said, Mom, we just saw this thing. We're going to go check it out up on the farm on top of the hill. So the mother thought, well, I better come with you since you're going on somebody else's property, and I'll grab my cousin Jean Lemon, who's next door, so the second adult, to come with us. And at this point, it's about 7 p.m., maybe a little bit later, and as they're trekking up the hill, it starts getting kind of darker. They're under the canopy of the woods, so they kind of slow down and they're just sort of walking. They have one flashlight, and as they're walking through the woods, they notice movement from their left in the woods themselves, and they shine their single flashlight in that direction, and they see this figure that they were reported to be between 10 and 12 feet tall, and appeared to be floating. And sort of when they noticed it, it noticed them. So it started sort of paying attention to them and coming toward them, which was enough to scare the heck out of them. And they turned and ran back down the hill and reported their sighting immediately. And there was first responders that were on the scene within an hour or so of the sighting. But as far as I know, those responders really didn't find anything in the woods. However, they did take the account from the witnesses, and even just from talking to the witnesses, the first responders were visibly shaken that night as well, just from hearing it being recounted. I was actually told that by one of the gentlemen that was there. So it was the local sheriff, sheriff's deputy, and the jailer of the Braxton County Jail that's actually just up the road a little bit. The sheriff and his deputy and the local jailer were all called out, you know, as the first responders to sort of investigate what happened. And so it actually took them a while to get on the scene. There was a report that somebody called in of a possible downed aircraft around the Gasaway area. So they were out trying to figure this out, and nothing was found as far as that's concerned. The theory goes that whatever those boys saw in the sky, these other people also saw it, and that's what, you know, so the people on that end saw this thing, and their assumption was an airplane going down. You know, these boys saw it, and I don't really know what their assumptions were. I think they assumed like a meteorite or something like that. But in any case, I do believe both reports were of the same thing, because there wasn't a plane crash that day. At least as far as I know, there wasn't one recovered, anything like that. But that's what did take them so long to get where they were going, is because they were down in Gasaway trying to find the remains of a plane that they couldn't find. But by the time they got there, and when they went up into the woods, as far as they could tell, especially in the dark, you know, they didn't really see much. As far as, you know, they definitely didn't see any sort of lights in the woods. They didn't see this figure in the woods either. But they were still dealing with a family and a bunch of kids that were visibly shaken by what they encountered. So they took their report, and the way that I understand it is, I mean, they really put a lot of stock in what the witnesses had to say. And according to the jailer's daughter, I got the chance to interview her a couple years ago, and I asked her what she thought she was, or what she thought the Flatwoods monster was, because almost always when you ask anybody anything point blank, they give you a real hem-haw answer. Well, her answer was, it was an alien. I said, oh, what made you say that? It's like, that's what they said it was. So if that's what they said it was, I believe them.
That's 1952. There were so many sightings in 1952, actually, that it's ridiculous at a certain point. That is a special place in time, and that's a window where things were happening, because the window moved after that, and it wasn't happening so much in America anymore. The 1954 French UFO flap is another one where it was happening in France and some of the places around it, Portugal, Italy, that sort of thing. So in 1960 and 1961, we have another window area in West Virginia, and it mostly involves big, hairy monsters, Bigfoot type creatures, including the bioelectric Bigfoot. And we called them all the Braxton County Monster because that was our only famous monster at that time, and we needed something to compare our monsters to. And since we'd only had the one, and that really drummed up newspaper sales, the newspapers, which named it, said, hey, looks like the Braxton County Monster has moved. What's ironic is that none of the 4 Braxton County monster sightings that are seen that year actually occur in Braxton County. One is like right outside of it, and there's another one that's like 2 counties away. The point is we had those. We also had in St. Albans, we had a sighting by a man named Red Miller, and 4 other people at a St. Albans bus stop. They saw UFOs. So again, we have this window that it's not just monsters, or it's not just lights in the sky. We have a combination of the two. There are periods where, how do you explain something like the Grafton monster? Because it happens in an isolated moment in time. That actually, if you're still going with window areas, you got to go, well, are there small pockets? Are they all big pockets? The 1952 one was huge, but then, okay, if it can go that big and it can go medium size, can it go smaller? So we have to think of stuff like that. And then, of course, that brings us to Mothman, which is probably the window area that most people think of, because this is really what caused Keel to even come up with this concept. Now, as far as West Virginia was involved, a lot was going on at that time. And it actually started much sooner than you think. Everybody remembers that it kind of started in Clendenin. While it started in the newspapers over the 4 people being chased in a car by Mothman on the 15th of November, on the 12th of November, people were digging in a grave in Clendenin, and a figure came up from the grave, and that was supposed to be the first sighting of Mothman. So it actually starts earlier, but it still starts in Clendenin. On July the 7th, in Clendenin, 3 young men, ages 18, and 17, were driving down the road and their car stops. They see a large flying saucer, their car stops, the radio stops. It freaks them out so bad that they abandon the car, they go to the sheriff, and they report it. So there's like this early cracking of the window.
As far as window areas go, Point Pleasant has to be the most famous window area in the world. Here, in this small river town, events would unfold which would alter the lives of witnesses to otherworldly phenomena. Quite possibly, those events may have much older and tragic origins, though.
Point Pleasant, West Virginia was established in 1794 at the place where the waters of the Kanawha and Ohio rivers meet. While both the French and the British laid claim to this area, the land south of the Ohio River in modern-day West Virginia and Kentucky are the traditional hunting grounds of the Shawnee. However, in 1774, Native American forces under Ketaqua, or Cornstalk, were defeated by the British at the Battle of Point Pleasant, and the Shawnee were forced to sign a treaty giving up their ancestral hunting lands. 3 years later, in 1777, Chief Cornstalk arrived at Fort Randolph, built on the site of the Battle of Point Pleasant, on a diplomatic mission. He was taken hostage, and while he was there, an angry mob stormed the fort and murdered a defenseless Cornstalk, his son Elenipsico, Chief Red Hawk, and another Shawnee, in retribution for the death of a man named Gilmore. Tradition states that after watching his son's murder, Cornstalk uttered a curse upon Point Pleasant, invoking the Great Spirit to prevent its prosperity for 100 years. While some believe the curse is a fiction that comes from a 1925 play called The Historical Pageant, newspaper accounts in 1875, 50 years before the play, mention the curse of Cornstalk and its effect upon Point Pleasant's prosperity. Point Pleasant refused to prosper for a long, long time. Over 2 centuries, the curse has been blamed for mine disasters, fires, explosions, tornadoes, floods, plane crashes, train derailments, ecological disasters, and of course the December 15, 1967 collapse of the Silver Bridge. Within a few days of the bridge's fall, newspapers reported the curse of Cornstalk was being blamed by locals for the disaster. The Mothman, a strange winged entity who had been seen over the 13 months prior to this tragedy, was also blamed for the bridge's fall, which begs the question, could the curse of Cornstalk and the Mothman be related somehow?
Is this area cursed land, or is it a protected land? That would depend on who you ask. What is known is that this place has spawned a legend which is now world famous. Unlike other creature sightings, this area produced accounts of UFOs, apparitions, strange electrical disturbances, and more. And unlike other sightings, it lasted for over a year, and some say it never stopped.
My name is Jeff Walmsley. I was born and raised here in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and I'm the creator, owner of the world's only Mothman Museum. Back in November of 1966 here in Point Pleasant, you had 2 young couples who were riding around on the outskirts of Point Pleasant in what we call the TNT area. TNT area was a vacated ammunitions depot from World War II where they manufactured explosives, things like that. After the war ended, the government just left everything there. So it was kind of a place where kids would go to drag race and you know, get together with their friends and things like that. About 11 o'clock that night, as they were getting ready to head back into Point Pleasant, they were driving an old 57 Chevy Bel Air. As they were coming down one of the roads in the TNT area, they saw what they at first thought was a man standing in the road. As they got closer, the witnesses said it was more of a bird-like creature, but shaped almost like a man. It had 2 prominent red eyes, and as they got up to the creature or whatever it was, the wings went out to almost like a 10 to 12 foot wingspan. It took off hobbling through the grass into what they called the old North Power Plant structure. They immediately started back into town, and as they got onto Route 62, whatever this thing was came over top of their car again, a second time, and chased them basically back into the city limits, spooked them really good. They came back in and stopped at a local hamburger joint called Tony's Drive-In.
Ronnie Wheeler said he was there that night when the witnesses related what they had seen.
I was with some friends of mine, and we were at what at the time, was Village Pizza, but back then it was called Tiny's Drive-In. And we were just kind of sitting there talking, and people were coming and going at the drive-ins, and we were kind of having fun. And all of a sudden, Roger Scarberry's car, 57 Chevy at that time, pulled up in front of us, and they jumped out of that car very excited and said, guys, you're not going to believe this. You won't believe what, and we're going, what are you talking about? Calm down. And they said, you're not going to believe this. We were just up in the TNT area, and this thing, we don't know what it was, but it had big, bright red eyes, and we saw it, and we left because we got scared. And we started coming down the road, and it was following us down the road. And I'm sitting there looking at them, and I'm going, what? And they said, yeah, it followed us, but when we got right about C.C. Lewis's farm, which is the old farm right outside of town here, it disappeared.
And that was the beginning of about 1.5 to 2 years of sightings, daytime, evening time, nighttime, in and around the Point Pleasant area. and later to become known as the Mothman sightings.
With Mothman, we don't just have Mothman. We also have lights in the sky, and we have men in black.
Yeah, before the Mothman sighting started in November of '66, there was a lot of UFO activity here in the tri-state area, pretty much in general. Strange lights in the sky, metallic objects flying across people's houses in broad daylight. That really had the curiosity of a lot of the locals here. You know, they were pretty much keeping their eyes to the skies and watching for all this stuff going on.
One such person who watched for all this stuff to go on was Linda Sigmund. She was a witness back in 1966 to what she believed to be Mothman and UFO phenomena at the exact same time. Linda agreed to sit down with us and tell us her story and take us out to the site where she had her encounter in 1966.
Most of my life, I have had strange things happen to me. When I was 3, I met my guardian angel, and when I was 12, I found out some of the stuff that she told me to be true. And then I was 16, I saw the Mothman.
Though it may be tempting to some to dismiss Linda's story due to the incredible nature of it, it also is a good time to remember that some of these characteristics are shared by stories and accounts that other witnesses report even today. Here is her full story in her own words.
It was April the 15th, 1967. I grew up in Pomeroy, Ohio, and my home was right on the Ohio River. And at the time I was dating a boy from Mason, West Virginia, which was right across the Pomeroy-Mason Bridge. And it was during the time of the Mothman incident, but at the time we called it the bird. Hardly ever was it called Mothman until at the end, because no one knew exactly what it was. We just knew it was down there and we wanted to find it. So my boyfriend came one night and picked me up and said, let's go look for the bird. So of course I was all for that, but he said, let's go over in Mason. I've got the perfect place to go. So away we went, and it was about 7:15, and we got in the car and went across the bridge, went over to Mason, and went about 2 miles out into the country. And he said, I'm going to do some hay this year for a farmer, and this would be the perfect place to look. So we pulled off the road about 20 yards and turned around, and we're facing the gravel road that we came in on. And we were there about 10 minutes, and it was April, so there were no leaves on the trees yet, and it was nice and warm. And we got a quilt out of the back of his car and put it over the front of the car and climbed up on his '56 Chevy. And we sat there for a while and talked. And I noticed he kept looking over his right shoulder. And I said, what are you looking at? And he said, look at that star over there. It sure is strange. And it would glow and get big, and then it would get smaller and then get bigger and get smaller. And in just a few minutes, the thing looked like it came right out of the clouds. It burst through, and the whole area where the object was behind the trees was turned into red and pink lights. And it was just like something coming through a vortex or another dimension. Of course, we didn't know what to do. We were just sitting there staring at it. And we thought it was farther away than what it is. But actually, it was only about, it was less than 100 yards from us. And it got gigantic, and it looked about the size of a full moon. So we didn't know what to do. So he said, I think we better go. And I said, look, it's moving. And it started slowly moving from right to left, and it moved behind the trees at eye level until it got to the end of the gravel road we came in on, and it stopped. You know, is that a UFO? Is that this the end of the world? What's happening? So immediately it started coming toward us, but it was only moving like 2 or 3 miles an hour. It was just like a treetop high at this time. And I can remember we were still in the car, and the object came diagonally to the car where we were sitting, and it was right up above us. And I remember looking up, and you couldn't see the stars. It was all blacked out. It was getting dark by this time, and it made a noise like I always said like a vacuum cleaner. That's the only noise it made. It lit up so much you could almost feel heat, but not really. It was just the whole light encompassed the whole area around where we were. I looked up and tried to remember what I was seeing, and there were like lights in the form of a cross. There were white lights and red lights across this way, and the bottom of it appeared kind of blue. And I just stared at it, and I prayed, and I thought, you know, what are they going to do to us? What is this? This isn't anything I've ever seen before. This has to be one of those UFOs. So the next thing I remember, which was really odd, and I will elaborate on that later, is that I was in the car, and my boyfriend was behind the steering wheel. And it's like one of those old movies. He's trying to start the car and it won't go. And I've got the passenger window down, so I'm leaning out, looking up still, and the thing is it's gigantic. And so he gets the car started, and we start to pull away, and at the left bumper of the car was this object standing there on the ground, and it was a man-like object, and I'm like, look, and it flies up and over the car and into the trees over here where it first came in. And I'm like, did you see that? Did you see that? And he said, I'm trying to get us out of here. And we pull off out of the pasture and turn left, and we're fishtailing down the road. I'm hanging out the car, out the window, looking up in the sky, looking up, and the UFO goes straight down over the hill towards the river. I can remember when we pulled out, he almost lost control of the car. I mean, gravels were flying, and we were flying and fishtailing. And we get down to the bottom of the hill, and there's an old strip mine area there. And I said, let's pull in here and talk about what we saw. He goes, I want to get out of here. And I said, well, we will. I really want you to see that creature. You didn't see it, did you? And he said, no, I was trying to get the car started, trying to get us out of here. He said, that was a UFO. And I said, no, but didn't you see the creature? He's like, no. And I said, well, we got to go back up there because you've got to see it. And he said, well, let's just sit here and calm down. So we weren't down there more than 10 minutes at the most. It's dark, and we're both, just kind of shook up. And I said, is the moon supposed to be out tonight? And he said, I don't think so. Why? And I said, well, what's that light coming up over the rise there, up that road that we came in on? And he said, oh, it's probably traffic. We probably should go. And he went to start the car, and it was not a car coming. It was another object, a UFO that was smaller. And this one was about the size of a Volkswagen. That's how I always said, a small car. And it was moving very slow. And this one was white and bluish white, kind of like an iridescent light. I'm thinking, oh, it found us. Could that be that creature coming back to get us? And the thing comes down the road that we came in on and stops. And we're sitting at an angle like this, and there's a little road that goes to us. It stopped right there, and I said, oh, we're dead, here it comes. And it was only about 3 feet above the ground, and it comes directly toward us like this. And we've got our windows down, and it stopped at the driver's side. And we're looking at it, out the side of our eyes, and you could look at it, and it didn't hurt your eyes to look into it. But we tried really hard to see if we could see anything in it. The thing that surprised us both is we felt like it was alive, like it was a creature in its own self. Because I remember him saying, it doesn't look like there's any windows or anything in it. It just feels like it might be alive. And I said, wonder if that could be that Mothman creature that we saw in another form. You know, and back then we never heard of anything like that. So, but I've since heard people say stuff like that. But to me, it appeared to be solid, and it didn't make a bit of sound at all. And it goes around to the front bumper of the car, and it was right at the bumper of the car, this object. It's sitting there, and we're staring at it. And I'm not sure exactly how long it sat there. I would say maybe 5 more minutes or so. But it didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just sat there in front of the car. And suddenly, whoosh, up over the car it went. And when it did that, the whole inside of the car just filled with white light. I was on the floor. I was on the floor, the passenger side. And I looked at my boyfriend, and he was slumped over the steering wheel. And we both said to each other, let's get out. We got out. He got out his side, and I got out my side. And I can remember it was a starry night. It was dark out there. There was no other lights. And we turned around and looked around, and it was gone. Nothing to be seen. So we get back in the car. He said, I'm going to take you home. I look at my watch. It's 8:30. Now you're talking, he picked me up at 7:15, between 7 and 7:15. It took perhaps 8 to 10 minutes at the most to get over to where we were. We weren't over there hardly 10 minutes. The whole incident with the first UFO didn't last more than 10 minutes. Then we were down over the hill. We missed a half an hour time at least.
This time loss, or missing time, is a familiar theme in classic UFO abduction and contact cases. The phenomena was first investigated by late ufologist Bud Hopkins and made public in his 1981 book, Missing Time, a documented study of UFO abductions. Hopkins had noticed a pattern of unaccounted for periods of time reported during UFO sightings and other strange events. Under hypnosis, he and eventually other researchers were able to help witnesses retrieve these missing moments of their lives, which were often filled with traumatic encounters with non-human entities. It is not known if these moments are erased by the entities or if the witness's unconscious mind simply chooses to shield the conscious mind from this trauma. Either way, it often results in deep unexplained anxieties, irrational fear responses, and manifests itself as PTSD-like symptoms.
We go out to the town of Mason, and we turn left and go down to the Pomeroy Mason Bridge. We get halfway across the bridge, and he said, I don't feel right. And I said, I feel funny. I feel like my brain has been picked. And I said, I just feel like it's something went in there and swept it out. I'm not afraid. I don't feel angry. I'm not sick. I'm not really scared, tense, nervous, anything. I'm just am. And I said, I don't understand it. He said, that's how I feel too.
This unexplained and out-of-place sense of calm or even dreamlike disassociation with the real world is often reported following these close encounters. Could this be a residual effect from the encounter with these beings? If so, it brings to mind the after effects experienced by tranquilized animals after they have been tagged.
So he takes me home, and we pull in, and Dad runs up to the car before we even get out, and he said, hurry, get out of the car. And I said, what's wrong? He said, your mother and I were sitting here on the porch, and we just saw a UFO come up over high school, and he said it turned left, barely made, I remember him saying it barely made over the top of the bridge. And I said, what did it look like? And he told me, it's like a small car. It was just a white ball. I said, well, Dad, we just saw it too. And that's back when we had landlines. The phone was ringing, and my mom got up and went and answered the phone. She came out, she said, your grandma's on the phone. She said, there's a UFO, possibly two, coming your way. Now, she lived in Upper Pomeroy, up on a hill. And come to find out, her neighbors had seen this same UFO, the little one that I've described, for 2 weeks straight, going up and down Route 7 from there. So her and Grandpa would go out every night and sit to see if they could see it. Well, this night they saw it, and it was coming our way. So there was one that we saw, the big one, then the small one, and then the two that Grandma and her neighbors saw. So 3 small ones the same night. Of course, my dad said, "Don't you tell anybody about this. You'll have government people up here, and I don't want to do that. I don't want my reputation. I don't want you to be teased." And so, okay. So the next day, all day on WMPO radio, lit up. People were telling about this thing that they had seen. And when I went to school that next Monday, there was a couple of twins that had seen it. And they had walked somewhere in Pomeroy up on the hill to a water tower. And one of these balls of light was above the water tower, and this was in daylight. They saw theirs.
Those who have such strange encounters often have 2 choices: to either investigate further or walk away and never look back. Linda decided to investigate further. And what she found was far more interesting.
This all has affected me all these years. In 2015, I got a computer, and I thought I have to find out what happened to me and if anybody else has experienced anything like that. Because up until that point, I got married, I had children, I went to work. But the last year that I was in school from where I had that experience, very strange things have always happened to me, but it escalated. It was like I was given this ability. I wasn't real happy with it when I was a teenager. I could feel people's thoughts and perceive things before they happened. And going to school and being a senior, my senior year wasn't very pleasant because of it. And, being a teenager too, it was hard. So in 2017, I moved to Parkersburg, West Virginia, and I found the Round Town UFO Society in Circleville. So I go up, and the people were all really nice, and they made me feel welcome. And one of the things that I got from that was they made me understand that I'm not alone. This stuff like this happens all the time. And I told them, I saw this creature. I saw this thing, and it was about 8 feet tall, black, and it had hands and feet and wings and arms, and it put its wings back, and whoosh, it was gone up into the trees, like Superman. And they're like, would you like to be regressed? And I said, you think that she could do that? This woman was there that did that. She was a licensed therapist, and she had done regression therapy before. I said, I know that there's time gone. I want to know what happened. So we set up a time a couple months later and went up to Circleville, and she put me under. And before I went under, I said, I would like to remember everything, every detail, no matter how frightening. I want to know what happened, because this has done things to me emotionally and physically and mentally. I need to know. So she said, and she was very kind. So we did the regression, and at the point where we're on the car and I look around, I can't find my boyfriend. We're out in the field. The UFO is above us. I remember sliding off the car, and I could feel the heat from the engine because we hadn't been there that long, and it burnt the side of my leg, and I fell down. And when I fell down on some feet, and it was the feet of that creature. I can still see it. I don't have to close my eyes. I can see it. I can see where we were, what we were doing, and how we were looking, and how we felt, and
All of it.
all of it. Now, I know this is hard to believe, but this is how I remember it. This is the truth. I was sitting on that thing's feet because it was at the end of the car. And I can remember looking part way up and thinking, what is this? Where am I? What is this? And seeing all the light from the UFO. That thing picked me up it had hands and carried me to the car, and the driver's side was open, and my boyfriend was sitting in there, and it either reached in and took him out, or he came out and put me across the bench seat of that car, and he got in, and the door went shut, and that's when I came to myself and realized I was in the car, because before I didn't know how I got in there. I didn't know how. And I looked, and I saw the creature standing at the front end of the car, and that's when it went up over the car. Now, I tried for years to get my boyfriend to talk to me about it, and he told me he didn't want to talk about it. It was too hard. I wondered, too, if he had had previous experiences with these things, because he told me that he couldn't remember prior to the age of 10. And you'll have to remember, he was only 17. So I think he had a lot in his background. I don't know why we were chosen, but I felt like we were chosen to experience this.
Following the strange encounter, Linda would also seem to recount some of the more biological after effects due to post-contact.
Did you have any issues after this encounter that you can recall, any kind of medical issues?
I don't think I was in very good health. It's hard for me to really remember because I didn't focus on that part of it too much, but I think that how it affected me more than anything was my nerves, psychologically, and then that just, escalated into other things. I know I lost a lot of weight. I probably got down to 98 pounds. I was very thin anyway, but I know I lost a lot of weight that one summer, and I wasn't very healthy.
You had described feeling a temperature off the light.
I remembered that. It felt a little warm, not uncomfortable. No more than if you're standing outside and there's a sunshine.
Or like a heat lamp? Or something
Yeah,
like that?
not quite that
Not like
strong. Just more or less it was a cool April evening, and then it was light, and just from bulbs, just from lamp. I didn't even think about radiation poisoning or anything like that. I can remember I was almost anorexic and maybe even having some trouble with hair loss, and I attribute it to that, but it could have been something else. It could have been from that.
Whatever Linda saw that year, she was not alone. There were multiple hundreds of witnesses to what would become the Mothman. And there was one researcher in particular who would come down from New York to investigate this and put Mothman on the map.
Well, John Keel came to Point Pleasant initially to investigate, the Mothman sightings and stuff. But while he was here, he and Mary Hire both would go out looking for UFOs. He said, they would see numerous lights in the sky. He would flash a flashlight, and these things would flash back. There was specific areas here in the area that he would go to do this. But, when I talked to him, number one, he took the whole UFO Mothman sightings seriously. He didn't poke fun at it or make it out to be some sort of a hoax or anything like that. He had a lot of respect for the witnesses that came forth, because he always told me, he said they really had nothing to gain other than being humiliated and made fun of and stuff. So, but yeah, he documented a lot of the UFO activity here. I don't think he ever really did see the Mothman or the big bird or whatever it was, but there were plenty of UFOs that he did write about and talk to people about. Then after the Mothman sightings started getting reported, numerous people were seeing this creature. Some said it was an enormous bird that people were seeing. Well, there was one witness in particular who I knew somebody who was at their house when they came through the door after seeing whatever this thing was, and he told me that her eyes were bloodshot and red. Now, I'm not sure if that may have been where she was upset, or if it was a conjunctivitis or whatever that term is. And then obviously a lot of those witnesses suffered some mental issues, a lot of stress, a lot of paranoia.
So PTSD-like response.
Sort of, yeah. For years afterwards, some of those people just dealt with, hearing footsteps on maybe the roof of their house, a garbled voice on the phone. Some of these people would not drive at night. One lady told me in particular, she said, after I saw that thing, I would not drive at night. So yeah, it did affect a lot of people.
But UFOs and Mothman would not be the only strange thing associated with this case.
A lot of the witnesses started noticing strange people in town, which later became known to a lot of people as the Men in Black. Dressed in black suits, the black ties and hats, sunglasses. They would approach a lot of the witnesses and ask them questions without really identifying who they were. So a lot of the local people here didn't know who they were, if they were government people, if they were military personnel. So it had a lot of people on edge because they were a little intimidating to a lot of people because of the way they looked, very peculiar behavior, and I think a lot of people just did not really want to be visited by these people.
Men in Black, of course, were originally made famous through Gray Barker's 1956 book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, as he tried to piece together what had caused Alfred K. Bender to shut down the International Flying Saucer Bureau at its height when everything was going great. He suddenly just says, we're going to stop. We're getting out of flying saucers. 3 men in dark suits came to me and told me I need to stop and I'm done. And for the next decade, he was done. He literally got out of it. And Barker was the chief investigator for the International Flying Saucer Bureau. He had gotten Bender's attention through the Fate article that showcased his investigation of the Flatwoods monster. And, they had a nice little team there, and nobody on that team knew why Bender was quitting either. There were so many theories that were thrown out. But in the end, Barker pieced together other stories of not 3 men in black, but instances where somebody, some sort of shady government source would come to them and cause them to stop investigating the flying saucers. And that became the Men in Black mythos at that point. By the time the Mothman flap comes about, Bender is actually returned to the scene, and he's come out with a book called Flying Saucers and the Three Men, where he proposed to finally tell everybody what had happened. And the general gist of it is that they had appeared to him, they had taken him to Antarctica, possibly in a vision, and revealed that they were aliens from another world. They were getting some element out of our oceans, and now they were leaving, so he was free to talk. And oh, by the way, our true form is the Flatwoods monster. Barker didn't find it very believable. A lot of other people it got panned universally through flying saucer circles that maybe Bender was just making up some science fiction sold as a nonfiction to make a quick buck. They weren't real impressed with it. But the Men in Black did return to people's attention because of the publicity that came before the book came out, and then because people gave reviews of it. And then ironically, the Men in Black start showing up in Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
My mother, at the time during the 60s when all this was going on, actually saw these Men in Black. I didn't realize this until years later after I'd written a couple books. She never really told me that until she came in the museum one day and seen the Men in Black mannequins that we have, and she asked me what those were, and I said, well, those were supposedly the Men in Black. And she said, well, I remember seeing those people downtown on Main Street when all the Mothman sightings were taking place. And I was kind of set back a little bit, and I said, well, you know, I didn't know that. And she said, well, they dressed just like that. And she said they were usually in pairs, and they would walk side by side. If they crossed the road, they never split up. And she said they just didn't, they looked out of place. She said a lot of people here in Point Pleasant just thought it was odd, you know, that the way they dressed, that nobody in Point Pleasant actually dressed like that. The most chilling thing that she told me is I asked her where that my father and she seen these people most of the time. And she said they were usually standing in front of Mary Hyre's newspaper office, which Mary Hyre was notorious for being known as being harassed by these Men in Black for putting the stories into the newspapers and the media and things like that. So that really kind of sent a chill up my spine when she said that they were always standing in front of Mary Hyre's office.
During our interview with her, Linda also seemed to describe what could be a Men in Black type encounter shortly before the Silver Bridge collapse.
I usually went Christmas shopping in Point Pleasant. And this particular night, I wanted to go down and get my sister a scarf at one of the stores down here in Point Pleasant. As I went to get out of the car, I noticed there was a man standing, leaning against the store, and he was odd looking. And I thought, man, he looks out of place. He had a black suit on, a black hat, black shoes, and I was a little bit afraid to get out. So some other people were going in looking at him, so I thought, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna look at him and see what he looks like. So I get out of the car and I go around and I walk past him and I kind of give him a side eye to see what he looks like. And he appeared to be about 5'7". He had a real sort of a paler complexion, but he looked like he was Asian. And at that time of my life, in this area, there are very few Asian people. So I thought, well, that's strange. And I go in and I get my scarf and I go out. And when I pay for it, I said, what's with that guy standing out there? And the woman that waited on me said, well, he's been out here all day, for several days, just standing there. She said she called the police. He said, is he bothering you? She said, no. He said, if he causes any problems, let me know. So I wait till some other people go out and I go out with them. And I look down to my right, and there's another one standing down there leaning against a pole. And I'm like, what are these guys? These must be the government guys my dad was talking about. So I get my purchase, and I go home, and a strange feeling was on me. It was dark all the way home, and I thought, I didn't like the looks of that guy. He scared me more than the UFOs. Now, why was that? Well, I'm a psychic empath, so I can pick up vibrations from people. And from him, it was just something that just was kind of off.
But the Men in Black were not just in Point Pleasant.
You know, a group was dispatched from the U.S. military to come, check it out soon after the sighting took place, and were instructed that if anything of any sort of substance was found, to send it back to D.C. And of course, at least as far as I know, they didn't make any sort of discoveries known at all, if there were any. And then I don't know if it would be, Men in Black or not, but I have heard that through the years, probably closer to when the actual sighting took place, but that Kathleen May had been contacted a time or two by folks basically asking her or telling her, to quit talking about the Flatwoods monster. And I don't believe they ever introduced themselves or anything like that. So who those people would have been involved with or not is a mystery as well.
It made people wonder, Keel especially, were they actually something that was like a government agency trying to shut things down? He didn't think so. He kind of felt like that this was part of the Trickster phenomenon, that That's why they were so imperfect, why sometimes they didn't act like they knew how to eat Jell-O. They didn't know how to properly interact with people. Their speech was kind of stilted. You'd see a cord running out of the bottom of their leg for no reason. Like somebody had misplaced that cord was supposed to go to machinery somewhere in a different scene, and it was going up their leg. And he thought maybe these are part of a different phenomenon. It was the Men in Black especially, along with the fact that there didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the Mothman's hunting patterns, for lack of a better term, and the fact that it showed up in places like Charleston, St. Albans, it showed up in Clendenin, it showed up all over the place. After the Mothman flap of Point Pleasant, it actually showed up in New York for a while. And as he was looking at the Mothman and the UFO and the Men in Black stuff that also happened in Long Island, he started to form this idea of the window area. And then, of course, we have Woodrow Derenberger's encounter with Indrid Cold along the road there to just shy of Mineral Wells near Parkersburg, West Virginia.
Well, the incident with Woody Derenberger happened about an hour from here in Point Pleasant in Mineral Wells, West Virginia. He was a salesman on the road on Route 77, I think. Saw a bright light in the road, claimed that there was a spacecraft landed in front of his car, and a being got out and walked up to the car and communicated with him and said, we will meet again and things like that. He went back, told his family about it, did a few interviews on TV, and the media kind of descended on him and his family and things like that. But that happened right around when the Mothman sighting started, so people thought there was a connection right there since it was so close in proximity and just an hour from here in Point Pleasant. So the UFOs, this being, strange appearance, Men in Black, Mothman, it all people started putting two and two together and thinking maybe there's a connection there.
These are precursors to the whole Mothman flap. It's like the door is just cracking open just a little bit. And then suddenly we have the sighting with Kenneth Duncan at the graveside. We have a ton of Mothman sightings come in hot and heavy all at once. And they're not just happening in Point Pleasant. They are happening in Charleston. There is a monkey-faced bird that's seen. That's interesting in and of itself because that is the exact description given to some of the big bird sightings in Texas in the early 70s. And it suggests that maybe there's a connection there. But we saw them in Point Pleasant. We saw them in St. Albans here. We actually had 3 sightings in St. Albans. We had Ruth Foster over at the River Lake Estates. We had Sheila Kane and her sister. They saw large winged figure over by the junkyard as they were returning from a store over near Jefferson. And the other one, we don't actually know where in St. Albans it happened because the newspaper reports that Mrs. Jack Yeager, and Jack Yeager went on, he was a city councilman here in St. Albans, and he went on later to become the mayor of Dunbar. But we know that she saw Mothman, and in the interview it even mentions that her husband is trying to shush her up and say, no, you didn't, no, you didn't. But she's like, no, I saw this large winged thing, and I think it was Mothman. We had sightings of UFOs in Bell. We had sightings of UFOs in Point Pleasant. There was another UFO encounter like Woodrow Derenberger's right there in Institute, 1 mile off the Institute exit. He saw it blocking everything in the westbound lane. So we have all this stuff happening at once.
There was a newspaper reporter for the Herald-Dispatch, Dave Payton, and he had mentioned that at the time, they sent him up here to check and write about the UFO sightings here in Point Pleasant area and stuff. Not so much the Mothman, maybe some on the Silver Bridge disaster, but he said that they created a map of the tri-county area, tri-state area probably, and tried to track, all of the different sighting reports that came in to the authorities and the newspaper offices and stuff. And he said it got to the point where there were so many of them that they couldn't keep up.
And it suddenly stops at the Silver Bridge. What about the Silver Bridge is the connection point? People say, well, Mothman was a harbinger. This was all happening because he was bringing about all this destruction. Maybe it's connected to the curse of Cornstalk. Maybe he was warning everybody. He was a really, really, really inadequate messenger of warning, if that's the case. Okay, at no point did he give any messages about bridges. Was his very appearance enough to bring it down? No. The interesting thing is some people wonder if the sheer amount of electromagnetic forces might have caused something to crack. That one little piece in the I-beam where it allowed stuff to come in there and rust and bring it all down.
Some researchers have theorized that high levels of electromagnetic radiation could have caused such a fracture. Alongside such speculation, there were also many cases of psychic phenomena, such as intuition and prophetic dreams. Linda shared one of her own visions.
The night before, I had a dream. And I dreamed of all these people screaming and metal crashing and packages floating in the water. And I'm like, what is this? I could see sirens and lights and all these beautiful packages. And I woke up, and it's not unusual for me to have psychic dreams. So I go downstairs, and my mother was the same way. So she said, I'll just go ahead and, go off to school and do your thing. And you got a party tonight. So just go have fun. So I thought, it's just one of those dreams. So I do, and we're getting ready to have like a Winterfest party at school, and we're all in the gymnasium after school. It's about 4:30. The band is supposed to come at 5 from the Charleston, Huntington area. And we've got everything ready. And suddenly someone, it's just a little after 5, bursts in through the doors. I can still see that kid coming through the door. The Silver Bridge has collapsed. We're like, yeah, right. He's like, no, it has. The band's not here. They were supposed to be there by 5 o'clock. So we all, girls are crying and praying, and it's before cell phones. So this kid has to go back and wait for them to call. So we don't know anything till about 5:30, 5:45, something like that. I guess the band was in line to go across the bridge to come up to Pomeroy. They saw all the excitement and everything. So they came up the Mason, West Virginia side and across the Pomeroy Mason Bridge and up that way. We went ahead and had our party, but it was kind of a downer, because we didn't know who or what was lost on the bridge. And I don't think there's one person that didn't lose somebody or lost somebody that knew somebody.
Though UFOs and psychic visions seem to precede this event, was there any actual proof that the Mothman had anything to do with the bridge collapse? Was it, as some claim, some evil entity bent on destruction? Was it there as a warning of impending disaster? Or was it something else altogether? We asked Mothman historian Jeff Walmsley for his take on this popular part of the legend.
A few people that I talked to claimed that, that somebody they knew or whatever had seen a large, dark-figured bird flying back and forth across where the bridge was located before the bridge fell. Other people said, well, they claimed they saw these guys, dressed in black suits and hats, climbing up and down on the bridge, before the bridge fell. So it's hearsay. I don't know how you could prove something like that. They may have looked at it as being a harbinger of doom and disaster. Other people looked at it as being just a large, abnormal-looking bird, that wasn't really out to harm anybody or anything. But, it's just, I guess that you have to look at the internal psyche of whoever did see it. If they thought it was, pure evil, or if it was out to harm somebody, that may have been their opinion. I personally, have never heard of anybody saying that they were physically harmed or attacked or anything like that. More so, from these men in black, they were more worried about these men in black coming to their house and maybe threatening them and things like that than they were, Mothman swooping down and hitting their car or something, I think it was the aftermath and the people that saw stuff were afraid, hey, are they going to come knocking on our door and label us as all crazy and we, lose our business or our reputation here and stuff.
So again, here we have another set of windows, and this one is amazing just for the level of scope that it has, but also for the sheer amount of things that it throws at us at once. It's literally giving us monsters. It's giving us flying saucers, and it's giving us these strange men in black, amongst other things. So what do we do with all of that information? And what causes a window to open and shut? I mean, you look at the timing of these things. You've got one in 1952, you got another one in 60 and 61, and then you have another in 66 and 67. And if that pattern had continued, they would have gotten closer and closer and closer until we were just at the apocalypse by now. That has not happened. Something caused it to back off. What was that? Now, I could get more data and see if I could find more windows. But I also have to take into account that some of those windows were huge, some of those windows were small. I have to take into account that sometimes I see phenomenon that looks like it's trying to communicate with me. And most of the time I see a phenomenon that is trying to deceive me. So I don't know if I could trust the messages if they were true anyway. But there is sort of a cohesiveness to the messages that we've received by and large. And Keel noticed that. And Jacques Vallée noticed that. And they noticed that the contactees and the abductees were all saying kind of the same things over and over. There was a lot of variances depending on their spiritual and religious background, but they were kind of saying the same thing over and over. They were saying, you need to get your act together, you're destroying your world. You need to get along a lot better. There were lots of improvement things. You need to get yourself on the right vibrational frequency, but when they were saying stuff like that, what they were meaning is like, you need to get your mind right, you need to get your act right, and you need to start treating people a whole lot better than you are. And it makes you wonder, okay, that means that if anything else, whatever these entities are, they have a vested interest in this planet being okay. And Keel was of the opinion, and he kind of based it on a weird interpretation of one verse in the Bible, but he believed that all of these phenomenon were actually inherent to this earth, that they were bound to this earth. He didn't believe that any of Jacques Vallée had the same conclusion, that UFOs are not from space, they're not extraterrestrial. Whatever's going on, they're from here, right? And that means if they're from here, they have a vested interest in making sure this place still works.
Whatever the reason or cause, one can only imagine the amount of encounters that took place at the time that never got reported due to the stigma surrounding these sightings. Regardless of what the root cause may have been, there were too many witnesses to simply write it off as nothing. Something happened here. The real question is, did it ever stop?
Over the years, there's been dozens of people pull me aside, maybe elderly people or older people would come up and say, we remember this, we saw it, but we never told anybody because we were afraid everybody think we were crazy. Our family. We'd get blacklisted as being nut jobs and all that, but they would tell me, they say, we saw it, we know what we saw, and it wasn't somebody dressed up in a costume, it was something that wasn't of the norm, But they waited that many years to really say anything. They didn't want the attention, but they wanted people to know that people were seeing stuff and that they did see it. The Silver Bridge fell in 1967, but there were all sorts of documented reports of people still seeing the strange lights in the sky, the bird-like creature and things like that. I think it just made for a little bit of drama, saying that once the bridge disaster happened, Mothman was never seen again, but that's really not the case.
Since we've been involved with this phenomena, we've heard stories about the guys who went out every weekend or or something. They were going out basically looking for the Mothman creature and to see if they could see it themselves, or basically like the very first wave of investigators into this sighting. And you were one of those guys. So when you had that initial run-in with the Scarberries and Mouse, when they showed up there at Tiny's and they described what they saw, you were compelled to go out and investigate yourself, to go look and see. What was it that kept you going the rest of that year?
Well, it was because it was something that was unexplained, and they were so excited that, I mean, that they were really hyper. And if it could cause somebody to get that hyper, then what was it? So to me, it was kind of like, did they see something? What did they see? I want to see it because I want to be able to confirm, yes, guys, I've seen it. I know what you're talking about. I was never able to confirm it.
You described the reaction as that they were hyper and excited. You now being prior service, would you relate that kind of surprise and shock any differently, looking through a lens of what you know now? If you look back to that point in time, how do you translate that surprise on their faces and their body language?
I really don't think I could relate it being prior service. I mean, even being in Iraq and seeing the things that I saw, I don't think it would come close to how excited they were.
Okay.
It's. I guess the way you could relate it, if I was standing here right now and a ghost come walking through that door, yeah, I'd be very excited, probably like they were. But I cannot relate it to anything that I've seen even in the service or since that time.
Whatever happened in Point Pleasant in 1966 may be a mystery, but there can be no denying the after effects from that first reported encounter. Today, the Mothman legend is known worldwide, and its fan base continues to grow daily, providing this small town with an economic boost unparalleled by any other legends except for maybe Roswell, New Mexico.
Well, the Mothman story and legend and legacy, or whatever you want to call it, has definitely been a positive thing for Point Pleasant because it happened here. A lot of those witnesses live here or have lived here. So, when things started really popping was when the movie, The Mothman Prophecies, came out. The term Point Pleasant was mentioned like 14 times during the movie. Point Pleasant, West Virginia. When you have a major actor like Richard Gere saying Point Pleasant, West Virginia, people pay attention and stuff. Then you had the onslaught of a lot of the pop culture, the Fallout 76 Enterprise, the toys, documentaries, podcasts, social media. So it was like the perfect storm, that came down the pike. The museum, we opened the museum and it's, crazy sometimes. The festival came about really in the early days of, right after the movie came out, because we thought it would be a good way to use the movie as a little drawing card to get people to come to the festival and stuff. And now it's one of the biggest festivals in the state because it's just a common interest. It's a story that's never been solved. Everybody has their own opinion. It's almost like the JFK assassination. There's so many conspiracy theories. Who did this? Who did that? It's almost the same thing. People flock to Dealey Plaza in Dallas because they want to investigate for themselves. It's the same thing with the Mothman story. The museum just gives them a lot of the artifacts and the archives for them to look at. Some people walk out laughing, saying it's just a crazy story, and other people spend 4 hours in there looking at stuff. So, everybody has a different angle on it. The Mothman story will never, ever go away because each generation will morph the story into maybe a, it's pop culture now. I mean, you have furry little creature dolls and squishables and things like that. Now, if you backed up 55 years to when these people did encounter this thing, they weren't really happy about running into it. They weren't thinking about toys and dolls and things like that. But little kids now look at Mothman the way I looked at Batman when I was 6 or 7 years old. That, it was a hero, TV, fighting crime and all that kind of stuff. So I think it'll just be with social media the way it is, and everybody's different take on it. Another 20 years from now, I think the story will still be there, and maybe some of the original witnesses by that time will come forward and even tell their side of the story and stuff. So I don't think it'll go away anytime soon.
Was Keel right about these window areas? Could there be some type of pattern to them? And could we use this data to not only further our experiments, but perhaps to validate some of his original observations? To test this, we would start where the first window may have opened.
We're currently on our way to go to the site where the grave diggers were digging in a cemetery in Clendenin, West Virginia, and the very first possible sighting of a winged humanoid or Mothman, whatever you want to call him, took place.
Yeah, allegedly this is where it all began. And, since we're doing the episode, I think it was a really good idea for us to get out here.
Yeah.
And check this out. And I don't know. I mean, I want to see the area. I want to see if there's anything that's kind of different about the area, sky-wise,
Oh, right.
Like that.
Right.
We hear about it so much, but I've never seen too many photos of it. There's only a couple that I've ever seen. So, in that, and we've also got the name of the grave. So we're going to see if
we found out the name
actual
of the individual who was being buried at the time, and we're going to go see if we can scout the actual location.
Yeah. So we're going to see how this pans out. And also brought along some equipment, just because.
Might as well.
Might as well. I mean, if there's anything there to this day, who knows? I mean, we are talking about residual stuff at this point, so.
Well, when you're dealing with some of this stuff, you got to take into consideration the whole theory about window areas and portals and openings. And this could be, since this is where one of these things were seen, it could be one of these areas of interest that are a little bit deserving of maybe a closer look.
Yeah. So, can't hurt, and we come out this far, so we might as well just, take some stuff along and see what we catch.
So, Ron, we just arrived in Clendenin.
Yep.
A beautiful little town. A lot of mystery here.
Very old town.
But we just discovered, when we set up the camera, another connection.
Yeah, there's another mystery here, huh?
So, the town is named after Colonel George Clendenin. And what battle did he fight in, Ron?
Apparently it's the Battle of Point Pleasant.
So we're talking about the same battle.
This is just bizarre.
That we lost Cornstalk in.
The synchronicities just never stop, do they?
A Mothman sighting in Clendenin, Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant. What is going on?
I don't know. Let's go see if we can find this grave.
Let's go look for it.
Yeah.
All we're doing is placing the data on the table. We're not trying to tell you what this is. We never have been.
I don't know what this is. Something shut the systems down.
Something just shut all the systems down. The one thing I'm very comfortable with saying, use any kind of electromagnetics you want, you can mess with that, is that this is outside of the realm of coincidence now. That was just recently, and that was our high. That shouldn't be effective because it was off.
It was
Whatever
off.
happened. 1.6. What? Got a 1.61.
It's moving slowly.
So,
UAP over the horizon. You're in the exact same location as all three have so far.
so it's letting us get back in.
Okay. All right.
So now whatever's going on might be over.
What?
Let's just
What?